Okay.
Well, it's good to see faces, new faces, families that we know, and we connect up in these times. I'm going to read a small scripture verse, and it's based in Isaiah 62, verse 7. You can read the whole lot in your own time. But it says, and give him no rest until he establishes and makes Jerusalem a praise in the earth. And so this evening we want to honor Hashem, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his blessings upon each one and those that will also be coming on tonight. May his strength come upon you and shower you, cover you with his blessings. As he watches over Israel, he watches over you and your families as well. So we have a wonderful special night tonight, and I'm looking forward to it. So to each one of you from Cairns, warm Cairns, we say shalom.
Shalom.
And blessings.
Okay, so it's my pleasure now to introduce our first speaker, and that's Dalia Ayalon Sinclair OAM. She's held positions with the National Council of Jewish Women of Australia, New South Wales, President, and also the National Council of Jewish Women of Australia, Israel, PR and Information Chair. As coordinator and presenter of SBS Jewish program, she has been building bridges with Christian communities. In 2005, Dalia introduced the annual Celebrating Israel event marking UN General Assembly Resolution 181, calling for a Jewish state alongside an Arab state, which led to the establishment of the State of Israel. As a daughter of Holocaust survivors, her poetry and international multimedia art exhibitions showcase her family's journey. She shares her time between Israel and Australia. So welcome, Dalia, and we look so forward to hearing you speak.
So thank you, Barbara and Norman, for inviting me to attend this very special event. I also want to welcome everyone that is attending, and of course to meet Dr. Sheree Trotter and Kelvin Crombie, as we are all here to actually express our, I would say, experiences and wishes for a better world at the moment. What I'd like to actually share a few things with you. So you mentioned that, yes, I was born to Holocaust survivors, but that really, born to Holocaust survivors has, I feel, impacted all my life. Both my parents survived Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen and anything in between. And they remained in Bergen-Belsen for 1 year as a misplaced people camp, traveled to Israel on the boat, Tel Chai, and then they were stopped by the British, taken to the Atlit camp, from there to Yokneam. So my brother was born, they arrived in April 46, and my brother was born in October 46. During that period, she was later also pregnant with me. I was telling this story because it's a story of courage. And I think if I gained a lot from that, basically, with what I'm doing. So when she was pregnant with me and had a baby at home, she was actually having special license to operate transmitting radio to advise people around, the Jewish people, that the British was coming to confiscate their guns and weapons, so they cannot defend themselves. So I felt that my mother, being pregnant and then also having a baby at home, taking on such a role, which could be ending up by killing her or hanging her once they discover that she does that, has shown a lot of courage to start with. And so both my parents are very involved then. So this is my stepping stone, I guess, into becoming a person that carries in her genes something very special. I believe so. I was actually born on November 1947, 6 days before that vote by the United Nations General Assembly, the vote that, the historical vote that for the establishment of a Jewish state alongside an Arab state. At the time, even in Australia, many haven't spoken about the Australia-Israel connection on that issue, but I will touch on that later. But I felt that somehow my coming into the being, I felt that obviously I had a role to play later. So, but the first thing I would like to also say about my parents, given what they have been going through, I grew up as a child adult with a lot of responsibilities towards the environment. I could feel and sense when my mother was too stressed, or I should not say anything, or, you know, I was so sensitive to everything around me. And I think it's something that I also was important to be able to recognize things like that. And I just wanted to start as a little girl, one incident that I think tells quite a story. And it shows, you can learn a lot from that, I think. It's when I was a little girl, I stepped out into the garden and there was a bush. And within that bush was a little kitten that was really meowing and crying and sort of calling for help. So as a little girl, the bush had lots of thorns in it, but I put my hand into it to try and save that little kitten. And that little kitten scratched me really badly because it was defending itself. It didn't realize that I was going to save it. And I ended up having to get treatment, going to the doctor, etc. But I think what I'm trying to say, because I was sort of injured by that little kitten, I never held any bad feelings to cats. I actually continued to love the cats. And I think it's teaching, because a lot of people will go the reverse. But I've learned from my experience to be more careful and to be able to assess the people on the other side before I make any decisions how I react to them. And I think that's important, to be able to be aware of who you speak to and how you speak to people. And I think the other thing that my parents taught me is to do tzedakah every day, which is a good deed, okay? To always speak the truth, to always look after your home, but always beyond that. And that's another thing that I learned from my parents. And I think it's something that we actually grow up with, is to look out and take care of others. And if there are doubts, to questions. And this is the way I was brought up. Have the courage to care, I think, something that I actually followed throughout my life when things were not as easy, but always to care. And when you care, you open conversations. And when you have conversations, you try and find what binds people together than rather separating people. So these are some of the things that I'm speaking about that because I think that's defined the way I was growing up with justice. Even at high school, if someone was doing something wrong to one of the pupils or my friends, I was standing up for them at class. I was against the teachers. I had my say. And that's the way it is, because I couldn't see that injustice was done to anyone. At a very young age, I was volunteering already at 9 with my mother. So I had that within me. So this is Israel, and I got married in Israel at a very young age, and I had 2 young children. And of course, we went through war, the Sinai War, and we went the 67 War. And together with my children at Inamir, we arrived in 73, 3 months before the Yom Kippur War, to Australia. And these were trying times, okay? Again, what do? You just arrive. So my late husband, he first thing, instinct, I'm going back. I have to go back to fight. So his mom stopped him and said, no, you're not coming back. Your brothers are here. You stay there. But we worry. 8 Yom Kippur War. It was my daughter's 4th birthday, which was not a good day to celebrate. But, we learned a lot by living in Australia. And one of the things that I really loved about Australia, I think at that stage, that there were people from a variety of countries. They brought back their culture. I heard so many different languages. I felt like in Israel, where you hear so many languages as well. And it was quite exciting. As time passed and the kid grew up, I got involved with the Israeli Mordon. I was one of the people involved with establishing the Israeli Mordon. And that was taking us towards the Lebanon War, okay, which was a difficult situation as well. But one of the things that we did immediately, we decided to establish an Israeli dancers group within the Mordon and a troupe of Israeli dancers that represented not only the Israelis, but the Jewish community at a variety of transcultural events, which was excellent. So we were spreading goodwill and learning about other cultures through what we were doing, which I think was very important. Same time, I started to work for SBS Radio as a producer and presenter, but became the coordinator of the Jewish radio program. And working for SBS was quite exciting because we had 68 different languages. The Jewish language, the Jewish hour in itself had 3 languages. So I was in charge of the program, and it was a daily influx of news, the daily influx of handling everything that we need to talk or not to talk about. And the good thing about working with SBS, which I felt, it was a ground for me to learn the other contributors from the other countries, or what I would say, the other groups that came to Australia, whether that is the Arab Australians or the French or Romanians or Italians, or all of those. We were communicating face to face. We had no issues with that. And there was an incident that caused a lot of havoc. I won't go into that at this stage. At the same time, in 1982, I got involved with the National Council of Jewish Women. Again, that was a platform of work which I enjoyed. I enjoyed that particular organization. I was on a paid position, but at the same time, I chose to immediately volunteer because I felt, okay, there were other Jewish organizations, but what was unique about the National Council of Jewish Women of Australia is that we had 3 platforms of work. One was Israel, second, the Jewish community, and thirdly, the contribution to the wider Australian community. And that was an amazing thing, to be able to not only engage what was straight Israel or Jewish community, which we did had lots of projects, but also to engage with other communities, which I felt, again, it went from one end to the other. It's like I was stepping up that ladder of being introduced to this multicultural Australia, and what you can learn by engaging with people from other cultures. And I believe it's a ground for being able to talk to each other, to acknowledge each other, to respect each other. And we did have quite a lot of events where we had Christians, Muslim women throughout the years that came to the events we organized. And I personally believe that women talking together and women creating a platform where we can engage and look at positive things rather than, distractions and against each other. How we share things together to work together. And slowly, by working, I used to be involved a lot with Israel PR during the first Intifada, which was quite difficult. And I remember the days where we used to receive in the office of the National Council threatening letters, where they're going to kill us, they're going to hang us, they're going to whatever. That was in the 80s, which was quite scary. But yet, I had an opportunity to engage and find out that not everyone is focusing on just fighting. There are a lot of people, on the contrary. We live in Australia, which to me is a ground for peace. It's a ground for talking peace. It's a ground for interacting with other people. And I think the Jewish community did a lot of good work with a program like Courage to Care, programs through the Jewish Museum, where schools came to learn about the Holocaust and interaction between Jewish, Christian, and Arab kids, which was, I think, building bridges within Australia. I went back to Israel in 1992 for a period of 10 years. During that period, I studied journalism, I was producing television, and I'm telling you a very special story where I was invited. It was a very difficult time here in Israel. It was the second Intifada. I'm sure you recall all the buses that were bombed in the center of Tel Aviv and everywhere else. And we were still trying to build some relationship with the Arabs on the West Bank. And we had, at the time also, there was later established the Paris Peace Program, where there was twinning between cities in Israel and cities on the West Bank. But I would like to get to that in a minute. I'm speaking about a certain incident where she became a very good friend of mine, a family whose daughter and her two friends sitting at Purim, and she had a granddaughter with her in a restaurant, and there was a terrorist attack in Tel Aviv, and the three women were killed. And the granddaughter survived. It was a very horrible situation where they didn't know where the daughter is. They were calling, looking at hospitals, and in the hospital they arrive and they show a policewoman carry the granddaughter and asking, whose is she? These are the grandparents watching it on television. So they realized what happened. I'm making it a very short story, although it's very painful, because I'm trying to get to some important information to show how things evolve from being at the really bottom part of evil and grief alongside, and coming out to do something different. I was asked towards a year, the first anniversary of her death, to produce a film about the family and what happened to them, etc., which I did. And it was a very emotional situation to produce such a film, of course. And the mother always spoke about her daughter, who always fought for peace, and she only dreamt of peace. At the end, after we finished the film and the anniversary, her mother's wish was to establish a forum for women, a forum called Women for Peace Forum in memory of her daughter. And in that forum, we invited women, Arab women, Jewish women, Bedouin women, Israeli women, Arab Christian, anyone who wants to get into that forum and meet regularly to find what binds us together as women, okay? And how women are able to work together to establish some platform where we can actually talk and look at the future, a better future, so our kids won't be killed. Now, during all that period, what happened, the Paris Center for Peace established twinning cities between Israel and the West Bank. And Ra'anana, where I lived and produced the film, and they lived, had a program together with Nablus. So the Nablus mayor with his councillors dealing with every aspect of the city visited Ra'anana, and we had an amazing, a really good meeting and speaking in front of children at school, at high school, both ends, Jewish and Arab, talking together about the future, about what can be done, what we can build together. And it was a very interesting day where we exchanged gifts symbolizing peace, which was a dream that we wanted to achieve. However, then of course, Zahava Rosen, the mother, and the mayor of Ra'anana, we were all invited to go to the other end, to Nablus. That was a day that we were attacked, but they didn't cancel the visit. They traveled to Nablus, and Zahava met an Arab woman who lost her son. He was shot by an Israeli soldiers. And they were able to hug each other and talk to each other. And I thought, you know, I think our human nature really doesn't want bloodshed. It doesn't want war, doesn't want any of that, you know. So I'm giving you little tips and things like that. The other thing that I was really very happy to get involved with, it's earlier, which I omitted to mention, it was while I was working for SBS, I was invited to visit a celebration, a Shalom group in Queensland. Some of you may know. It was established by Audrey Hodges. You may know Fraser Harding, who was the president. They had an annual festival, support of Israel. And I was sent by SBS to find out what is this group about. Are they really friends of Israel? Because everyone is very suspicious of the other. What is going on? What are they cooking? What are they ulterior motives, etc. And for me, it was really the first time that I'm engaged with an organization where they speak about, of course, Jesus and all of that, which is natural. And they perform Israeli dances. They present the Shabbat scene and all these things. But I also did a lot of research while I was there through the whole day. And I got very involved, and I thought, wow, if everyone does what they do, and with Audrey Hodges says, we are here to ensure that what happened at the Holocaust will never happen again, that we will stand with you hand in hand. I'm glad she's not alive now. Yeah, I'm really glad, because she would have been really upset about that. Sister Christophora, who's joined us now here from Germany, she was then a part of the Evangelical Sisterhood of Mary in New South Wales, and I met her at one of those events. I think it was 87. And I came to the front because everyone recognized at the time, I'm daughter of Holocaust survivors. And she came up to me and she started to cry. And I didn't understand why she was crying. And then she explained to me that she's asking forgiveness for all the crimes that her people did against the Jewish people. And she was crying, and I was crying with her because, of course, it was very emotional for both ends. But again, I'm saying to her, I haven't recognized what their role was, what they were doing. I've learned a lot about them later. But one thing I said to her, you don't take it upon your soldiers and shoulders. Yes, we carry them as well in our heart. What your forefathers did, the crimes of your forefathers. We became very good friends, and I visited them in Canaan, here in Australia, and later on I was also a guest speaker in Germany. And I think at the time was quite evident that in Australia the Jewish community was quite uncomfortable about that hand of friendship that extended to them, because they always thought that there's an ulterior motive. And for me, it was something that I actually found out, that they are really there to be our friends, to support us. And I was invited again and again to Celebration Shalom on a yearly basis. I've invited the JNF to bring in their certificates and planting of trees. Vic Al-Hadad from the Jewish Board of Deputies, he became a guest speaker, so did Uri Temal, a Reform rabbi. So I brought in a lot of the Jewish community to engage and to understand that group is not about trying they're not evangelical. That was not the motive. They were really true friends of Israel that were engaged in collecting funds to bring them the airplanes full of Russian immigrants to Israel. They were helping everywhere they can. And we really became the best friends. In fact, Audrey was like my Australian mom. I really loved her. And yeah, so I think what I'm trying to say that it's harder to cross bridges of the unknown. But in order to cross bridges, you have to learn the other side and who they are and what they are about. And that's the only way to progress towards understanding of each other. the Jewish community in Australia was very much against all this celebrating is shalom and everything that sounded Christian, and they were concerned. I was not. And I ended up building bridges between the Jewish community of Queensland and Jewish community of Australia and the Christian communities and the Sisterhood of Mary. And I remember when I had a farewell party that I'm moving to the north, to Queensland, and the sister arrived to my farewell parties with 3 guitars, and the security guy called me and said, "They have 3 nuns here. Is it safe to let them in?" And that's what it was. And I said, of course, they weren't used to that. But we opened the doors. And I think once you do that and you're able to engage, and with my PR, I was traveling all around Australia, by the way, with a film that produced about Anat Rosen, who was killed by a terrorist attack, and her story, and the story of her mother being able to engage with people who really want peace. I'm not talking about those who want to tear us to pieces. I'm talking about those who really seek peace. They don't want war, okay? Not everyone is in that boat.
Well, look, we have enjoyed what you've shared so much, Dalia. It's just been so precious, so much information, and with so much feeling. And I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of people very keen to ask you some questions when we have a Q&A.
Like just to add, can I add on something?
Sure.
No, we do it later, don't worry. Now, because I was doing some special at the National Council of Jewish Women level, some of our projects which were transculturals, and a Mum for Mum project that I brought into Australia, which exists today. We serve women of all cultures and all traditions. And I think it's really important to do that. And of course, a Celebrating Israel event, which is about, the real strong bonds that ties Australia to Israel throughout our history, which I haven't had a chance to talk about, but maybe you might know about it from the events. This year I'm holding the 20th. I will be holding.
I'm sure people can ask you questions about that, because you're so knowledgeable and talented, and you've just shared with your heart, which is an absolute blessing. I'm just aware of that it's quite late in New Zealand, and we do have Dr. Sheree Trotter to speak next. So Dr. Sheree Trotter is a Maori. She has a PhD in history at the University of Auckland. Her thesis was on Zionism in New Zealand to 1948. In 2012, she co-founded the Holocaust and Anti-Semitism Foundation, interviewing 70 Holocaust survivors. Sheree completed an Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy Scholars in Residence at the University of Oxford in 2025. She is co-director of the Indigenous Coalition for Israel and the Indigenous Embassy, Jerusalem. Some very exciting ventures. So we would just welcome you, Dr. Sheree, and ask you to unmute. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Norman. Thank you for inviting me to join you this evening, and greetings, everyone. Kia ora koutou, as we say here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's great to be with you all. I won't try and cover everything that that we've been up to, but I will bring you up to date with the most recent work that we've been doing. And I know that you've already heard, if you were here a couple of months ago, my co-director, Alfred Naro, presented on this platform, as well as Grand Chief Linda Prince, about the Indigenous Embassy, Jerusalem. And like Norman and Barbara, I have been concerned about the way that the Indigenous voice has been captured by the pro-Palestinian narrative, and have worked as in the same way that Norman and Barbara has really in Australia. We in New Zealand, when I set up the Indigenous Coalition, and prior to that, was very aware that the anti-Israel voices amongst our people, amongst the Indigenous people, were dominating the narrative. And yet I knew that we had a lot of Māori people, a lot of Indigenous people who stand with Israel, who love Israel. And there was a particular moment when one of our Māori politicians went to Gaza. This was back in 2016, I think. She went to Gaza as an Indigenous woman to stand with the Indigenous women of Gaza. And many of you will know the scriptures, and the scripture in Genesis 12:3, which talks about, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And I really felt concerned for our people that we're being put on the wrong side of history. You know, we're standing on and we're being positioned on the wrong side of history. So back then I started to think about what we could do to combat this, to push back and to show the other side of the story. And at the time I was still at university doing my PhD on Zionism in New Zealand, through which I really got to know the local Jewish community very well, as well as our Holocaust work too. But at the time I was busy with my thesis. And when I finished the thesis, I set up the Indigenous Coalition for Israel in order to provide a platform where we could tell the other side of the story, where we could publish articles, create media. And one of our goals was to establish an Indigenous embassy in Jerusalem. Of course, it was quite an ambitious goal, but it was there as one of our goals. And we actually had that opening event in February, it was quite phenomenal the way it all happened. And I have to say, you know, it was not just one person who managed to bring this together. And as a believer, you know, I believe the divine hand was orchestrating and behind what happened. So a year ago, in fact, I was at Oxford doing the Scholars in Residence that was put on by ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. And following that, went to Jerusalem and met Deputy Mayor Fleur Hassan Nahum, presented to her this idea of an Indigenous embassy as a way of really pushing back against that false narrative about the Palestinians being the Indigenous people of the land. And she loved the idea, she bought the vision. And a month later, some friends of ours, colleagues of ours, found themselves in Israel. They didn't find themselves in Israel. They'd planned a trip, and this was part of the Welcoming the King of Glory, which some of you know about, had been involved with. It was a trip that was planned, but what wasn't planned was that the trip turned out to be the same time that the attack happened. So they were flying as they headed off for Israel. The attack started. So they stopped in Dubai, and they had a choice as to whether to carry on to Israel or whether to turn back. And they chose to carry on because they felt that this is the time that they need to be there to stand with Israel. And so Brad Harmy and Greg Motu and others, they carried on to Israel. And they too found themselves having a conversation with Fleur, and this was on the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast show, and they discussed the idea of an Indigenous embassy with her, and Rick Rilings was there as well. And Fleur was so excited by the idea and very moved by the fact that these people had come to Israel during a time of war. And she was visibly moved by that, and you could see that on the program. And so she announced there and then the intention to establish an Indigenous embassy in Jerusalem. And so when Brad came back, we followed up with emails, and Fleur endorsed us to carry this project forward. The interesting thing was that when Brad left, he's part of the Indigenous Coalition for Israel. When he left for his trip, I hadn't managed to catch up with him and tell him that I'd had this conversation with Fleur about an Indigenous embassy. And when he had the conversation, he didn't know I'd had a conversation. I didn't know that he'd had a conversation. And so we found out that we'd had the same conversation. And so there were things like this that happened along the way. So Fleur was very keen to have an event very quickly during a time of war, so that we could make this grand statement and to show the public, to show the world that Indigenous people actually stand with Israel. And so the event was amazing. We had a small contingent of Indigenous peoples with us. We didn't have time to organise a big group to go, but we had representatives from the Khoi tribe in South Africa, who are the oldest Indigenous peoples in that land. We had Native Americans and First Nations people. We had Pacific peoples from Hawaii, from Tahiti, from Kingdom of Tonga, and Maori people. Unfortunately, we didn't have an Australian representative there, but I know that at the time the Millers had some things that had come up, some sad things that had come up for them. But we will get there. We're developing those connections. And so we had this amazing event. And I think one of the amazing things that happened on the night was that it turned into a celebration. And I think what happened was that as the different groups got up to give their messages of support and love for the Israeli people and what they were suffering, and just standing with them, and there was a band there that the Indigenous people got up and danced to the music, because that's what we do. You can't have good music and not dance to it. So we got up to dance, and everybody joined in to dance, and the politicians and the diplomats and the rabbis joined in the dancing, and it turned into a wonderful celebration. And you can see videos of that on our website, Indigenous Embassy Jerusalem website. And so it was a really phenomenal event and a phenomenal night. And I mean, the atmosphere in the room was really quite something. It was quite electric, and it just really had a lot of grace and blessing over the whole event. And so that was the kickstart. And then we had the opportunity, we were invited to go to North America by Grand Chief Linda Prince. And this is where I began to see that I was just a small part of a much bigger picture. Grand Chief Linda Prince had gone to Israel in 1999 with 100 other Native American chiefs. They'd had a meeting at the Knesset, and they had put on the table their desire for an Indigenous embassy. And I only recently learned about this story. And so when Grand Chief Linda Prince heard about the embassy, she was so excited, and she couldn't be there because of her health, but she wanted to invite us to come and to celebrate and to acknowledge the leadership of the embassy. And so it was an amazing thing for me to learn that this vision had been held by Indigenous peoples for 25 years, and I got to play a part in it. And so we did have this amazing event. And I think one of the things that also Grand Chief Linda mentioned was the Maori involvement in that time. And there was a Maori leader, Monty Ohia, who really stood with Linda Prince, who wanted to bring Jewish people into the movement. And the movement which had been established was the World Christian Indigenous Peoples Movement, which was established in 1996 by Monty Ohia, this Maori leader. And so Linda Prince wanted to bring the Jewish people into the movement, and she faced a lot of backlash. They faced a lot of backlash within the movement, anti-Semitism and replacement theology and this sort of thing. But she said Monty Ohia stood with her and took the backlash. And because of that, she really wanted to honor the Māori leadership of today because of that history with Monty Ohia. And it was quite phenomenal, actually, to hear the impact that Monty Ohia had on the Native Americans, because many of them had come to New Zealand at that time. And he really encouraged them to rediscover their culture and to practice their culture, because for a lot of Christians, their culture had been kind of trampled on by this idea that you couldn't embrace your culture as well as being a Christian. And so Monte Ohia was part of a movement that really helped Indigenous peoples to rediscover and see the culture restored in a way that was honoring to their beliefs and to their faith, but also honoring to their identity. And so that was really special. And for me to experience the First Nations, the Native American culture, was really quite something special. It was my first experience of that, to see the way that they practice their culture with their drumming and their music and their regalia, with their protocols of honor. It just blew us all away, actually. Some of their protocols were, we have our protocols, but we were so impressed with some of their protocols. So it was a real learning time and a rich time of exchange and developing our relationship and developing our connections. And so the Indigenous Embassy, it's really just launched, it's just beginning. It's happened so quickly that we're now kind of doing the catch up of getting structures in place, getting organization in place. Things like funding, we need a lot of funding, and that's a whole area that, you know, I'm not very good at, but all of these things that we now have to catch up with. But we are working towards a event in Israel at the end of October, because many of the Indigenous peoples weren't able to, didn't have the opportunity to come to the opening event, the inaugural event in February. We're working towards having a grand opening event, 28th to the 30th of October in Israel. The details aren't finalized yet. We're still working at that, but we plan to have a grand opening March. We have locked in place an academic symposium, which will be held at the Bible Lands Museum. And I think this is so important because I'm aware that a lot of the false narratives begin on the campuses. Well, it doesn't begin there, it begins elsewhere, but the campuses are the hotbed, and it flows out from there, you know, to media, to politicians. And we need to be in there, you know, we need to be in there telling the truth, basically, telling the right story, correcting the narratives. And dressing academia is one of our goals as an Indigenous embassy. So we have locked in our date of the 29th of October for an academic symposium to be held at the Bible Lands Museum, which is such a great site for it, because the Bible Lands Museum tells the story of Jewish connection in the land over millennia, you know, the archaeological history. And so it's really exciting that we're going to be doing that. We want to have a day for some influencers and advocates to be able to come and share, and we want to have a business innovation track. So some of those things are still in the planning, and we will be advertising those as soon as we have things locked in. And so it's very exciting. We're just beginning, and we invite you all to follow us on social media, to sign up to our newsletter, and to follow what we're doing and to get involved. You know, we invite you all to get involved in this work, because I just think it's so vital for the stage that we're in, where what we see is one of the main drivers of anti-Semitism is this anti-Zionism. It's this false narrative about the false narrative that Jews are the foreign European colonizers who have dispossessed the Indigenous Palestinians. And, you know, one of our main goals is pushing back on that narrative, as well as all the other things that we plan to do in developing our relationship with Israel as Indigenous peoples, and providing this platform for Indigenous peoples to stand and support in solidarity with Israel. And so I'll leave it there, because I know that Kelvin is going to be sharing with us as well, and I will hand it over. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Sheree. That was awesome. That was amazing. And look, we know that you and your team are doing wonderful work, and we give you all our support. It was Norman and I were just so blessed to be in New Zealand in 1996 when Monty and Linda Ohia had that First World Conference of Indigenous Christians and to meet the Native Americans when they came over and Native Canadians. It was a very blessed time. And so thank you so much. And if you can stay around for questions, that would be great as well. And so we have our third and last speaker, Kelvin Crombie. So Kelvin is an Australian of mixed British and Aboriginal heritage. As a young man in Israel, and hearing of the Jewish heritage of Jesus, he came to faith in Jesus as Messiah. He lived in Israel for 25 years, married Lexi, and his daughters are all Christian Savras. He pioneered the Anzac Lighthorse work there, has written 20 books, produced documentaries re Israel, Jesus and the Covenant, the Anzacs, Jewish people, Holocaust, and Protestant work in the land of Israel. So amazing body of work and amazing contributions he has made over a really long period. And so we would ask you to unmute Kelvin. And he's actually joining us from the Netherlands, amazingly enough. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Hoe gaat het? How are you all? With my Aussie accent, that's a bit of Dutch. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, the opportunity of being with you, Norman and Barbara. I often say after such an introduction, I'm just a boy from the bush who was saved by grace. And that's the essential part of it all. I had the good pleasure to be in that same conference that Sheree was talking about in North America just recently with all the protocol. There by default, I suppose. I happen to be in Canada and the US doing some other work, some ministry work with CMJ primarily. And got the invitation from Linda Prince to join them and gave a presentation called Covenant and the Character of God. But the whole event while we were there absolutely blew my wife Lexi and I away. It really was an incredible experience. As Sheree's already spoken about, and the music, how the music and the drums and the beat, everything, it's just been so wonderfully redeemed for the Lord. I don't think I'll ever forget that experience, Sheree. I don't know about you, but that was a powerful experience for both Lexi and myself. And the protocol and the way they honoured lots of different people was quite magnificent. I don't really know what to say, to be frank with you, after these two presentations before us. But I think I might allude to one aspect of the Indigenous component concerning Israel and Israel's restoration. In the introduction that Barbara gave, she said, I'm of British and Aboriginal heritage. Well, the vast majority of my life, I didn't know I was part Aboriginal. It was all hidden from us. We were always told we were part Indian, and that was just a way that they had in the Western Australian bush anyway of hiding any Aboriginal connections, so you wouldn't be discriminated against. And that was the way it was. We were told we're part Indian. And that's the way a lot of people did know that we were part Aboriginal. There were people who knew that my great-grandmother was an Aboriginal lady, but it was all just hidden from us kids. And I never really stumbled across this until, ironically, I was asked to do a documentary back in 1996. It was called The Battle for Zion, and it was being put together by a British person who had read the stuff I'd written about the role of the Anzacs in the Middle East. And Peter said, listen, let's do a documentary on the role of the Anzacs in the First World War and the Second World War and the role they played in the restoration of Israel. And you tell it as a third generation Australian. You can be because you have done the research, said he, then you can do the compare. So I said, okay, fair enough. So at that point, we had relocated then back to Australia for a long sabbatical. So I began to put the documentary together, and I thought, well, I know I had relatives there in the Second World War in the Australian Army, one of whom was killed at Tobruk. That's where I got the interest as a 5-year-old in Israel, which ultimately led me to go and live there. But I didn't know anything about the role of my relatives in the Middle East in the First World War. And so I began to do some research, and I went to my grandfather, my mother's father, who was very, very dark, and he's from the Indian, the so-called Indian heritage. I later learned that everybody in the area knew he was Aboriginal, but we didn't. So anyhow, I started to research him and his brothers. And I knew he had one brother who, called Leo Webster. I had a number of brothers. I knew one had been in the army. So when I was researching about this great uncle, one of the things I got from the research in the Australian War Memorial that he was part Aboriginal. And I thought, hey, hang on, we were always told we were part Indian, and these brothers had married Aboriginal ladies, so we weren't blood relatives. And here am I reading that my great uncle actually was registered with the Australian Army as an Aboriginal or part Aboriginal man, something like that. So that was an eye opener. And so thereafter, the can was open. There was just no turning back now. I had to find out everything I could. So that's where all the research then began. And I discovered the great-grandmother, great-grandparents' marriage certificate. They weren't married in India, which we'd been told. They were married in the bush of Western Australia. And her name was Julep. No surname, no family name, no parents, nothing. It's just Julep, and that's it. So I later found out there was an Aboriginal name, and it was also the way of, you knew pretty well that the person wasn't of Aboriginal heritage. So that's how it all began. And thereafter, there was further research into the family side. Most of my immediate family didn't want to know anything about it, okay? But me being me, that's why I'm wired. I wanted to know as much as I could. Cut a long story short, I went back to Israel again in the year 2000 for another 10-year stint with the family. And that's where, even though I began doing the light horse tours way back in 1988, I started them off again in the year 2000, and soon they just grew in popularity, and it was, that led to the charge of the light horse tours in 2007 and 12 with the reenactments, and then 2017, etc. But it was when I was doing all this particular work, at the back of my mind was this whole Aboriginal component, but also don't forget that there were lots of Maori men in the New Zealand mounted rifles, and I'd actually picked up some books and done some research on them once when I was in New Zealand. So, well, I didn't know much about the Australian Aboriginal light horse soldiers, but that just grew in time. I think we were on a tour together in 2005, wasn't it, Norman and Barbara? We went down to Beersheba and everything as well. But throughout those years, the information was just, was basically gathering. 2007, we had the first reenactment at Beersheba, and I think we had 50 riders for that reenactment. And there was one particular person on it. He was from an Indian background, but he passed himself off as being a tracker, one of the Aboriginal trackers that was in the light horse. And in 2012, we had no people from an Aboriginal heritage there. And I remember after the 2012 event, I had a strong sense that on the 2017, the big event, the 100th anniversary event, I just had a sense we needed to actually have a large number of Aboriginal, people of Aboriginal heritage who would come and ride in the reenactment. And there was a guy that I knew, Raymond Finn, and so I contacted Raymond, and he had once been in a light horse group, spoke to him, and Raymond then went out. He went to Hermannsburg and began to locate some younger men. And I went out there on one occasion to speak to the folks at Hermannsburg and to meet some of the potential riders. And it just began to grow and develop. But I got to a point where I realized, well, my role's almost been done. Now it's time for the real light horsemen to get involved. So Barry Rogers, who was one of the directors of the Light Horse Association, then stepped up. Barry went out to Hermannsburg again, spoke to the young folks out there, and Raymond, etc., and many other people. So Raymond Finn, and so the whole thing just began to grow and develop. So by 2017, for the major event, when we had 100 horsemen, there was a good number. I think there might even have been perhaps 12 people of an Aboriginal heritage were actually riding in the reenactment. And of course, one of the most significant things was at Semach, when we did a small event at Semach, the railway station at the bottom part of the Sea of Galilee. And way back in the early 1980s, when I used to take my family on holiday to the north of Israel, we'd always stop there. My kids were very small. I tell them about the charge in September 1918. I don't know if they're interested to know what they took in, but I got great excitement about telling somebody about it. And so whenever I could, I would actually take people there to the old rundown railway station. And there was nothing, nobody else was doing that because nobody else was interested and very few knew about it. But of course, that's where lots of Aboriginal soldiers were involved in the Light Horse at the Battle of Semach in September 1918, mostly 11th Light Horse, many from Queensland, but also others from elsewhere. And so in that same period of time, the idea of developing something at Semach in the Sea of Galilee grew, and that really began growing from 2007. And slowly, thankfully, the Light Horse Association got involved. And again, another one of those things I was able to sort of, in a sense, pioneer and then hand over to the group that could actually do something about it. So when we came to 2017, we had a major event at the Sea of Galilee. By this stage, that had been developed, the museum was done, it was all cleaned up. And there was a plaque there as well to the involvement of the Australian Light Horse in the capture of the Sea of Galilee. And on that occasion, I don't know how many people we actually had riding in on horseback. It wasn't a charge, it was part of a parade. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there were at least 6 of these young Aboriginal people and a couple of others were actually in the parade riding in. So that was possibly the first time that was being done. They were being honoured. The role of the Australian Aboriginal Light Horseman was being honoured in this particular sense. And it was a very, very significant moment, I thought. But through the same period of time, there'd been thoughts of doing a statue there. I suppose in a sense, I might have been one of the ones who came up with that idea of honouring in a very tangible way the involvement of Australian Aboriginal soldiers at Semach, the Sea of Galilee. You know, you could put a statue in many different places, but to have a statue of that nature in the Sea of Galilee, I think was quite significant. So by that stage, I'd been back in Australia, and way back actually, in, I think it was 2010, a number of years before we had the reenactment tour of 2017, 2010, Barry Rogers and myself, together with Hilary Moroney and Paul Moroney, we had a meeting with Ken Wyatt. And Ken was an Aboriginal man, Aboriginal heritage, who was a member of Parliament. We had a meeting with Ken, and that's when we first proposed the idea of actually having a statue there. And Ken took up the idea, thankfully. Ken actually reminded me that we're related by marriage in some particular way, which I wasn't aware of, but he was. And so, again, it was one of those things that once it's out there, other people then began to get involved. And there are quite a few people. I think Raymond Minikin might have been involved at this stage too, I think. But a lot of people just began to sort of, yes, it's right to do this. So, and Barry Rogers in particular from the Light Horse Association took the idea on. I think you two, Norman and Barbara, you might have been involved, and Jill Curry and many other people as well. And so ultimately in 2018, that statue was unveiled in the Sea of Galilee. And I recommend all Australian and New Zealand groups should go there, because it's quite a powerful symbol when you think of this man from Aboriginal heritage reaching down with some poppies and laying it close to where one of his Anglo light horsemen had died or something like that. I can't remember all the details. But it's quite a powerful testimony. I think the fact that you have this statue there on the Sea of Galilee is quite significant, because with both the New Zealanders and with the Australians, First and Second World War, there were people, soldiers who were serving there to help liberate the land of Israel in the First World War, to help stop the Nazis coming in the Second World War. There were people from Aboriginal, Indigenous and Maori background there. So I think that in a sense that sort of lays the groundwork for what you folks are doing at the moment, for what Sheree's endeavouring to do, and others, yourselves, in developing the embassy, the Indigenous embassy in Jerusalem. I remember way back when I was a new Christian, way back in the early 1980s, that's when the International Christian Embassy was established. And there the idea was to actually have a platform and to show the rest of the world that their various nations might have taken their embassies out of Jerusalem, but there were many people within those nations that stood by God's covenant relationship with Israel. So that was the idea behind the establishment of the Christian embassy in 1980. So what are we now, almost 44 years later, and we have another expression again. And so, I think that any way that we're able to stand up, raise the flag, you might say, the ensign from Isaiah 11, which actually the word used there is nes, means flag. It can also mean a miracle. To raise up the miracle of Israel's restoration for everyone to see. I think it's a great thing. I just hope that in a sense everybody can be involved. It won't just be Indigenous representation. Hopefully, again, it'll be something which people from around the world can just say, the establishment of the state of Israel is a clear sign of the existence of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who cuts covenant and keeps his covenant promises. And on that note, I think I'll finish up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kelvin. Such a wealth of experience and knowledge, just absolutely amazing. And I recommend you to Kelvin's books and videos as well. And it was 2004 actually when we went to Beersheba, or actually probably the end of 2003, December. We went to Beersheba for the first time, and you were our tour guide with Jill Curry as the tour leader. So since then we've taken tour groups ourselves and been there many, many times. And prayed at CMAC in 2010, and were blessed to be there in Israel and catching up with you in 2017 at both Beersheba and CMAC. And so we applaud the work you've done. So I just want to see if Norman wants to say anything, and we open for questions. No, he's being very humble here.
I think there's quite a few hands will go up and some questions. So looking forward to it. I've certainly been touched and blessed by our speakers here tonight. I know that many of you also have. And so now it's that time for you to ask some questions. And so we will.
Yes, if you could just
So
put your hand up and
unmute, obviously.
Yes. So who would like to ask the first question, and let us know who you would like to ask the question of. If you don't know how to raise your hand using the computer, just go like that.
You might have to.
I'll have to go along here so I can see you.
The mic's off.
Oh,
There you
here's
go.
somebody. So can you just say your name? You can unmute, and who you would like to ask the question to.
Yes, it's Damien and Anne-Marie, and we know Kelvin quite well from Anne-Marie and Horse met him in Jerusalem and Israel, but we worked for Celebrate Messiah for decades.
Yeah, in 94, Kelvin, a while back.
Now, can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, the question I wanted to ask you, Kelvin, was after reading your book, For the Love of Zion, I realised how strategic the Anglican Church was in establishing the first church or Protestant church in Israel. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on where the Anglican Church is going with that today, if you have any thoughts on it.
Well, I'm probably not the best person because I'm not that involved with the Anglican Church, but I can probably say that today you've got two Anglican churches worldwide. You've got the established church, Anglican Church, which still looks to Canterbury, but you've got the more evangelical, I could say split off, but let's say the more evangelical Anglican Church, part of the movement called GAFCON.
Mm.
They really have stuck by the guns and sticking with more of a conservative approach. And in many ways, it's the African church, Anglican church, and the Anglican church outside of the West really is leading the way for the evangelical branch, or GAFCON it's called. Anglican Church of North America also, there's different names given to it. But within the Anglican Church itself, you have probably only a remnant of people who really understand truly their biblical mandate as far as Israel is concerned. You know, you've had wonderful people like Wilberforce and Simeon and Shaftesbury and Bishop J.C. Ryle, who's widely regarded as one of the great theologians, who are very, very strong on God's covenant with Israel. You don't have that many people of that nature within the broader Anglican Church today. So CMJ is going; it's still holding up the flag firmly for the Anglican Church and in different parts of the world, but you know, I'm sure that and other Anglicans as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I believe we've got Marlene Matthews next. Would you like to unmute, Marlene, and ask your question?
A flag and that put it up. Just want to get his email.
Marlene?
So sorry, one swipe of the finger and it went to outer space. So we're in Australia. We've been in Israel for this year until a month ago. And so we've been well connected with the prayer movements and so on in Israel and the help and so on. I guess now that we're in Australia, I'm asking what is yet to be done? What needs to be done and what is yet to be done that can be done to shift the mindset and the political stance and the heart of the church? It's a broad question, but it's a question saying, where are the gaps that are most pivotal that need to be filled now?
Okay. Do you want anyone in particular to answer, or whoever has it on their heart to answer, please go ahead.
Well,
Thank you.
Can I
Yes,
say
go
something?
ahead, Dalia.
Well, I think from my point of view, I mean, I'm currently in Israel, so and I understand how things are really bad in Australia at the moment. Anti-Semitism is rising and everything else against Israel is popping up. I feel that Australia needs to we need to remind the Australian government of the history that binds us together throughout the many, many years, where Jewish people were actually fighting for Australia, World War I, World War II, the contribution that you made for Australia as a country, and also that Australia as country, actually a multicultural country. One of the things that, and the other thing is, which was very important, Australia was there involved in the partition plan very highly. In the petition plan through Dr. Everett, who was actually in charge of the ad hoc committee, writing the plan for the division or participation of a Jewish and Arab state. I think a lot of people are ignorant enough or ignore the two ways of doing it. The fact that the Palestinians were given a state on the 29th of November, and they have not accepted it. And the day after the vote, they actually set out to shoot and kill the Jewish people and send them out of the land from the river to the sea, which they're chanting together today. This is part of the history. Australia was the first one to vote. Australia was behind it. Australia, to remind, I think it's really to remind the people the history, because when I see people that chant and have no idea what they're chanting about, a country was given to the Arab people when there was a partition plan.
Mm,
They did not want to accept it.
mm,
And I think that's the important thing. And I think the other thing which I'm very upset in Australia is the severe rise in anti-Semitism and anything that's Israeli and anything that's Jewish, something that we have never experienced in the past. And I believe that in a country like Australia, which is based on everyone is equal, the anti-racial vilification laws and all that stuff, when the government stands silent, when the Israeli flag is burned, and when people are chanting burn or gas the Jews, that should not happen in Australia. No community in Australia should be stood out from the others. If that happens, we are on the road to really something terrible, not just for the Jewish community, but next there will be another community. So power, we are here allowing this had to happen against a community which contributed to Australia vastly, whether in any sphere of work. I mean, we had in the war, we had sermonists, we had governors, Jewish government, we had politicians. We helped build the country, basically. So how do we allow that to happen? That the Jewish people can't wear anything Jewish or put a yarmulke on? I mean, I recall a situation in Australia where I can't remember which politician it was that said, well, we need to cancel the wearing of the jihad for the Arab women, the Muslims. The Jewish community was against that. The Jewish community stood against it because if you start to, focus on one community which is allowed or not allowed to do, I mean, we are a multicultural society. We should be treating everyone equally. That's how I feel.
I will thank God that there are movements that have risen up, and quite promptly after September last year, October the 7th. And there's a lot of movement to stand up for Israel publicly and politically and so on. So obviously the press looks at one side, but like many hundreds and many thousands attend some of the events that are pro-Israel, as said, for those supporting Israel and publicly. So yeah.
Thank you for that. I think it's really important to stand up, but also people need to dig into the history.
Yes, true.
And see, I think the worst thing, if people are not informed, and I think what's happening, the masses usually join because they need something to do, but I have no idea what they're doing. Really, some of them.
Thank you.
So, Dalia, we need someone like you at SBS. But look, thank you for that. We've got Sylvie has put her hand up to ask a question. Would you like to unmute and come on, Sylvie?
Shalom, everyone, and thank you, Barbara, Norman, and your wonderful speakers. I'm in Melbourne, and Dalia, you've got a state Labor government here, and you've got the federal Labor government, and basically, and excuse the way I'm speaking, it's basically toxic what's happening here, and the anti-Semitism is really beyond belief, and that people find it difficult to go out at night time, and there are some suburbs that being Jewish you just actually can't be in anymore. So this is only my opinion, but if not only the state Labor government as well as the federal government had come right out at the beginning and said anti-Semitism, this isn't Australia, it's undemocratic, and stamped it out from the beginning, we would not be in the place that we are today. Sorry, I'd say more of a statement than anything because I'm really passionate about it. And I too, I'm pleased. Yeah, look, and it's a shocking thing to say, but my parents were Holocaust survivors as well. We did it really tough in Israel, came to Australia with nothing, and I'm glad they're not here to see what's going on.
Yes, I say the same about my parents.
Yeah.
Mm. Yes, look, you know, I agree with you, Sylvie. It's shocking what's happening, and what happened at the Sydney Opera House on October 8 should never have been allowed to happen without repercussions, because the anti-Semitism bus has truly run away on us. So, but we've got to recover that ground. Yeah.
Sometimes I feel it's gone far enough, and if it doesn't stop now, we are going to get into a worse situation all around Australia. Because if it's allowing one crowd, or or one community to be isolated in a way like that, anti-Semitism has risen like to an extent which are what 800% or so since the war, since October 7. It's not acceptable. Not acceptable.
Agreed. Dr. Sheree, did you want to? Oh, sorry, Stephen, you had your hand up, didn't you? Would you like to go next? Stephen Green, would you like to go next? I think you had your hand up.
Miriam.
Oh, hi. Let me start my video. Good evening, everyone. I don't know that I did have my hand up, but it's been great to hear the speakers, and equally concerning the concerns of rising anti-Semitism. I was at a function yesterday in Melbourne with Josh Frydenberg, who showed part of his documentary, and when asked what the number one thing we can do to combat it and to get our social cohesion back on track, he said, if the number one thing is education. And so that is on all levels, was his response. Formal education through syllabuses and in the classroom. Thousands of kids go through the Holocaust museums that are now in every state in Australia, and I think there's one in New Zealand as well. But also informal education and just having conversations happening and getting people, Jews and Christians, together to understand each other and to have more meaningful dialogue. And I guess the question was to Sheree, that Nova Peris was Josh's guest yesterday at this function. Very high profile Aboriginal woman, a champion of our country, and someone who's so passionate about Israel and standing up for the truth. And I can only see her passions educating and inspiring others from the more general community and the Indigenous community to stand with Israel and not be trapped into thinking that the pro-Palestinian stance is should have the Aboriginal flag. I'm wondering, in New Zealand, are there some high-profile Indigenous Maori that you've reached out to that will stand with Israel?
Well, if you're talking about high-profile people, I can't think of any. But what we are doing is we are developing our networks. We're reaching out. We're having meetings with small groups around the country, and we're just doing that at the grassroots level of educating our people. I mean, even in the last week, I did some meetings with a small group, about 30, meeting in a lounge, and they were open. They were wanting to hear. You could see the expressions on their faces when the penny dropped that, oh, Israel is not doing what the media is telling us, and so there are good people out there who are just ignorant. They don't know any better. It's the climate in New Zealand for Māori has been difficult because our Māori political party has come out very strongly pro-Palestinian, and they're very effective on social media, and it's become one of those things which is just trendy and it's the latest fad, and you've got to tick some boxes to be acceptable as a young person, to be popular. You've got to be pro-environmentalist, you've got to be LGBTQ rights, you've got to be pro-Palestinian. It's kind of like you've got to tick these boxes to fit in, and they don't really know much about what's going on in Israel, Palestine. A couple of lovely young teenagers came up to me the other day and said, "What does All Eyes on Rafah mean?" And so I explained to them what that was about. And so what we're doing is just the hard work, really, of having small meetings, having conversations. We're working away on social media, and we're really working at that grassroots level. We are having conversations with people in positions of power as well, but they're not ready to become public about being pro-Israel. It's interesting that we've just had appointment of our new Human Rights Commissioner. I don't know if you have this in Australia, but we've got a new Human Rights Commissioner and a new Race Relations Commissioner, and they are both pro-Israel. And this is very significant. And already the media is beating them up because they're pro-Israel. We've had a change of government at the end of last year, which is more conservative. And for Israel, it's been a huge shift from our previous government, which was very anti-Israel. We're not there yet. There's still a way to go. We'd love to see our leaders be stronger and firmer. And, they're trying to do this dance of a bet each way, of trying to stand on both camps. It's this whole notion of balance. But it's definitely an improvement on what we've had. And so, to that question, what do we do? I think we have to put our heads down, we have to work. I think people need to find their lane and run in their lane and just work hard in their lane, whatever that lane may be, whether you're in media, you're in politics, whether you're a prayer, pray hard. I believe in the power of prayer. And I've seen in this country prayer networks spring up in the last few months, and I'm part of a daily prayer group for Israel, meets every day for an hour, prays for Israel. And so there are things happening. But we need to work. We need to work really hard in all these areas.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'll just say quickly, it won't be long, Dalia, just say quickly that there's a group called the We Are Here Foundation with Eli Rabinovich in Perth, and he asked me, it must be 2 years ago now, to write a handbook on the Holocaust, and I added anti-Semitism into it as well. So it's an educational thing with lots of activities suitable for upper primary and university and adult education. It's actually a free resource. All you have to do is go onto the We Are Here website and register, and you can download it. I'm actually going to turn it into an ebook on Amazon so that people anywhere in the world will get onto it, because Amazon's got a much greater reach than the We Are Here Foundation website.
Well, sorry. I mean, what I'm hearing is that you focus only on educating the Christians. I think everyone should be educated. I think some of the Jewish people also need to know the history they don't know, and so they don't have those tools to speak up. I'm sorry to say that. A lot of people, we all need to learn the history, whoever lives in Australia. So people will not point out, these are the Jews, these are these. I mean, I can't understand it. I can't accept it. When I was in Australia, I was teaching about the history. I was going from one country to the other, from one state to the other, to tell the history, so people will know. The same to the Christian people in Australia. You know, we need to know the history. Chanting things that they have no, and most of them don't even know what it means. They don't know what it means. And I don't know that I mentioned earlier, but I would like to mention that in May, here in Israel, we marked the 80th anniversary of the Holocaust in the part of where my parents came. We had in Netanya, where I live, Christian group that arrived, Germans, second and third generation Germans, whose parents or grandparents were Nazis who killed thousands and thousands of Jewish people. Now they decided, no one talked about it, but they decided to research their family's history. And once they found out, one of them found out that his grandfather was hung because of the Nuremberg, court. He was hung. And what they did to the Jewish people, they gathered together and they're now traveling around the world to express sympathy with the Jewish people, ask for forgiveness, and speak up for the Jewish people. And I think these are the things that people need to do. It comes from the heart. When I tell you, he was staying on this guy standing on the stage, and he talked about what his grandfather was doing. And one of the things he was saying, my grandfather was also in charge of killing the partisans, the Jewish partisans. My father was a Jewish partisan who was shot during World War II. And when I heard that, I started to cry, actually. But when he finished his talk, I walked up to him and I said, Frank, I need to talk to you. And I said to him, my father was shot, but he survived. He cried like a baby. I've never seen a man cry so much. And I said to him, you know what? The good thing is I'm standing here in front of you who understand now that these things should not have happened. And that's how we work together.
I just want to say that the climate at the moment for dealing with Holocaust education in New Zealand is very difficult. We have created Holocaust exhibitions which are shown in museums, and we've just had one that has shown for 10 months in one of our major museums, and we were booked to take it to another museum, and they came back and said they cancelled because of the security risk. They did a security risk assessment, and this is the climate at the moment, is that there's just so much fear around anything to do with Jews or Israel. It's just all shut down. So, these are the conditions we're having to work in right now. But, social media is brilliant, even though it's also toxic, but you've got to be in there to be able to tell your message, and it's a message that you can get out and it's available for people. So we're on social media and we're doing what we can to educate through social media.
Thank you.
I'd just like to mention also context. I think it was Stephen's comments sometime earlier, that each and every person that's on here today, you are an ambassador. Every person has the opportunity of actually going out and, even in a very, very normal way, meeting others. There are different ministries. Well, if you put together all the different ministries in New Zealand and Australia that have got a connection to Israel and the Jewish people, there's lots of them. So every one of those ministries has a role to play. There's a certain group of people they can reach. Every individual, like Sylvia and like others, every individual has an opportunity also of getting out and taking the message. But then there will be pushback, no doubt, as Sheree's just mentioned. I put together a book just after October last year. It's called Foundational reasons for the conflict in the land of Israel. And a small booklet, and it's gone through some various printings, and it's getting pushback in the UK right now from groups that don't like what's been stated. So it could become a legal issue, I don't know. But that's what's happening also, is that when you start putting out the proper perspective, I believe the biblical perspective and the historical perspective, there will be folks out there who will not want to be exposed. Yes, I completely agree, Sylvia, about the 29th of November 1947 vote. And the vote was for both the Jewish state and Arab state. I know from personal experience, a lot of people don't know it, but a lot of folks don't want it to be exposed as well. That the Arabic-speaking people had a chance of their own state in 1947. They don't want that news put out there because it puts them into
I'm
a bad.
sorry. I've been doing it.
Our responsibility is to continue to actually put it out there in whichever way we can, to put out these facts. We might think, oh, nobody's listening, but I still think we have to continue to persevere and put out these very, very basic details. And ultimately, somewhere along the line, the penny's going to drop for more and more people. But we can't stop. We can't stop it. We've got to keep persevering and doing it.
We'll always have opposition, and we just need to expect that and just keep on regardless. Thank you, Kelvin. Sylvie wants to say something. I'm aware that we've gone over time, but how about we take 2 more questions, and then we thank our awesome speakers, and please stay in touch with us and the speakers, and let's work together. So Sylvie?
Oh, thanks, Barbara. And Kelvin, I mean, and I hear what you're saying. I've actually reached out to a lot of people that spoke at the Never Again Is Now rally in Melbourne and have met with them. And I mean, and they're people like you that are pro-Israel and just can't stand anti-Semitism. And it would be really nice to know if there are churches around that I can actually, in Melbourne, that I could approach that won't. I mean, I'm not particularly, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm more open to reaching out to people that are going to have ears to listen to me. So I, really, I don't know where to start.
Yeah, that is a problem. That is the problem, but we just got to keep trying, because if we stop trying, then there's going to be a vacuum, and something's always going to fill that vacuum. So there's plenty of work for us all to keep doing.
If I may just add that we've had the privilege of speaking at a number of churches and a synagogue as well. And one of the, not the easiest, but it's very, very fruitful, is to introduce pastors with rabbis. And most times that whenever we have invited, both parties have been extremely responsive and delighted at the privilege, and others have said, oh, next time can you ask me too? So it doesn't have to be like complicated. We start with just like a cup of tea to start with, and it just goes from there. But we've seen a really good response between leaders in the Jewish community and leaders in the Christian community, and churches that are open to have somebody speak.
Can I just
Marlene, sorry, just say, Marlene, you and Sylvie should catch up with each other. We'll connect you after the meeting if you like. Sorry, Dr. Sheree.
So I was just going to say something similar, and especially for Christians in the room, I would encourage you to reach out to the Jewish people that you know and in your neighborhood, and just invite them over, have a cup of tea. And I've tried to do this sort of thing, and I brought together a group of Māori women and Jewish women, and they're from different kind of cultural groups, I suppose. They wouldn't naturally mixed together, and they're actually from different parts of the country. But I had my Jewish friend who was really struggling and needing some comfort, and I had a Māori friend who said, I just really want to comfort the Jewish people. And so I brought them together, and we just had an amazing time together of just being able to enjoy each other and share love, basically. Just love each other. So yeah. I think it's for us Christians actually to do the reaching out on that one.
Okay, one more, and we really do need to end up all these wonderful speakers and questions and comments. One more, and we have to finish.
And I just say, if anyone on the Christian side is looking to reach out and needs a bridge to get to the rabbi or to the Jewish community, please reach out to me. Yes, I'm an active member of the Melbourne Jewish community, but I know people in Sydney and all over Australia and New Zealand, and rabbis and people in the community. So we've got 120 Christians from Crossway Baptist coming to my local synagogue in Caulfield to enjoy a Friday night Shabbat service and dinner at the end of August through Pastor Dale Stevenson as a result of the Never Again Is Now rally. And it's a natural progression from declaring your interest and your desire for friendship to actually come and show it. So the Jewish community are open arms and ready to embrace any love and support and friendship.
That's awesome, Stephen. And
Sorry.
Stephen's also with a group called SCAFI of Christians and Jews that meet together as well and do seminars. So,
Yeah, well, I have been waving, but I don't think they're seeing me. Hello, can you see me or hear me? No?
Hello. We're going to have to end. So is there something you'd like to say quickly?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, that I agree with everyone about the education. And I've been involved with, the Never Again Is Now and contacting churches to get them to come along. And it's been wonderful to have that connection with, Jewish people, with the synagogues. And but I'm actually, I've been writing a book, and I did want to see if I could get Kelvin's email because I mentioned him in the book. And so I'm just wondering if I could somehow get that before you close. Is that possible?
Yeah, I can write it in for you if you like.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
If that's okay with Norman and Barbara.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
fine. So while you're doing that, I'll ask Norman to end off.
Steve, just one question before I quickly finish. Steve Green.
Resource.
I think just the importance there of the years of Josh Frydenberg. I think it's important that Josh Frydenberg, would be good to catch up with other voices of Indigenous people, especially Indigenous Christians there as well. I think it's well appreciated there with Nova Paris being alongside and also listen, having the ear. I think there is quite a fair few voices, and I think that's been one of the things that's truly been missing is the Indigenous Christian voice in whatever aspect that we're looking at. And I think it's important that more on that political landscape. It's where we are as a nation. I'm very, very, very concerned the way this government of our nation that we have. It's a very, very alarming. Also with the way that the possibilities of the Muslim vote having their say federally and putting up you could say a team that to me is very, very alarming. Years ago, I heard it right through Christian churches, congregations, that to say that where people would say Christians and politics don't mix, And while that was being said, there are other voices that have ungodly practices that are having inroads and saying, okay, well, you Christians, that's what you believe. Well, you know, stay where you are. But I think the influence of the voice of Christians, as I said, it's very good Nova Paris is there, but there are others that have a voice that could make a big difference, that could have, you know, cut right through a lot of things even more. So I personally would like to have a talk. For me personally, where I'm at is I'm hoping to have an ear with Peter Dutton, but also if there was an opportunity to have the ear of Josh Frydenberg, I think that would be very, yeah, for me personally, I think it's important. Even though I saw that documentary, I think that there are a lot more hard issues that need to be spoken of even more. And so I think that even after tonight, what we're hearing is a wonderful dialogue. I think Barbara's book, if any of us that's on here tonight, really take that into account, because there was a lot of work that was put into this handbook. And personally, I think that if this book had the opportunity 2 years ago, it could have made a big difference within the education. That's my personal belief, that it could have, but it's going to need a group of leaders like yourself that can help and be able to mobilize something of that into that education system, right through not only education, governments and other things that could, you know, it's got to start to happen. It's very concerning what's coming out of the education system right now. Very, very alarming. And but we can, and I think too, with even stations like, as Dalia had mentioned, of SBS, I think there needs to be more inroads into SBS, but also ABC, because of things that come across, which we know is quite lefty type thinking. You and I know that it's something that, but we as Christians in our nations, I think, I personally think when that, even for Indigenous people in Australia, that especially Christians, we have to come out very, very strong than what we have. And that means just taking it more publicly than what we have. I think with this group that we have, there could be something of a big, that we need the voice of the whole community, but especially with the Christian community, to come out in a strong way. And whether we have to just, you know, just daily putting up great big billboards to make, even if it's that, even if that's something we need to look at. But we also need to make inroads. We write press releases, Barbara and myself. A lot of them don't get into the media. A lot of them, and we know, we've heard it, with a lot of it, it's been thrown in the bin, unfortunately. So in saying that, there are families that's on here tonight that have big inroads into people that you are contacting with. And I think if we can channel those things in a very strong and in a way that I think we could create something that's even more mobilizing than, you know, each one is doing a great things. And I really honor you, each one of you. I want to honor the speakers that was on here tonight for but each one of you also has stories, and important stories of your standing here within Australia and the relationships I think so. On behalf of Barbara and myself, we personally just want to thank each one of you for this time. I think it's been very, very special. There's things that I'm going to take away and to process, just like each one of you. But somehow, we've got to make a bigger statement. And I dare you to, I would say this to each one of you. I dare you to dream big in whatever way that it's meant in that way to do. I say that whatever prayer support, whatever finances that we all have, and how we could just pull those things there together to make such an influence, because there is such a need, such a great need within, as I said, Australia. I love this nation, but I see this nation the way it's going, and it's not the way that Hashem, it's not the way that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob want this nation to go. So it's important for people like yourselves, the calls on your lives, and how effective that each one of you have been. So Kelvin, thank you for being on here tonight. It was a blessing. Thank you, Dalia, all the way from the land, Yisrael. And also for you, Dr. Sheree Trotter, it's been a blessing, even though we haven't personally met. That day will soon come. And to each one of you, thank you for being friends. Thank you for standing with Israel. And that's
Thank you.
important. Thank you for standing so strong with Israel. And I just want to commend you and honor you, each one of you. Shalom.
Shalom lecha, and to you.
Shalom, shalom.
Kelvin Crombie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Did you say hi to Dalia?
I didn't
I can't even
because
find
it's Anita.
Yeah.
It's